A little bit earlier on today, speaking about the passing of President Robert Mugabe, who died this morning, we believe in Singapore, where he'd been receiving treatment. We're not sure what treatment he was receiving, but it's a country that he visited a lot of times over the years. And we've been getting reaction and analysis from various people during the course of the program as we continue to unpack this passing. We're now joined in studio by Blessing Vava, who's with the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, and also political analyst Tino Mambewu. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, gentlemen. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Peter, for inviting us.
All right, let me start with you, Blessing. Your immediate reaction when you heard this news. He was 95, so I guess we knew the day was coming, but it's always a shock when it does arrive.
Well, in our African customs, death of an individual, death of a person is something that we do not receive, with smiling faces. It came as a shock to me, despite the fact that he has been in and out of hospital, and also despite his advanced age.
All right, Tino?
I think in a way, I would say that I was shocked that President Robert Mugabe has died. One would have expected that he would die anytime soon. It's common at his age. Actually, the thing that surprises most Zimbabweans is, why was he in Singapore? Yeah. What was he doing there? That is the question that has been bothering us. I will tell you that in March somewhere there, my own grandmother, who was about 95, when she became very sick, we wanted to take her to the hospital. She said, "Why are you taking me to the hospital? I can feel it within my bones that my time has come. Rather, what you should be doing is calling everybody from wherever they are across the world to come and see me while I'm here." Unfortunately, the tale of Mr. Mugabe is a different one. The time that he should have spent with his own people in Zimbabwe and saying goodbye, he chose not to do that. I don't know whether it was the government of Mr. Mnangagwa which decided to take him back to the Far East, or it was out of his own volition. So at the end of the day, we are not surprised that he has passed on. I'm a bit saddened to an extent. I won't celebrate his death, but there is so much thoughts that come to mind, just upon receiving such news.
All right, we'll get into those thoughts. And I was just wondering, as you mentioned that President Mugabe died in Singapore, and I suppose in many ways, some people might say that really tells the story about Zimbabwe, that he trusted the healthcare in a foreign country far away much more than the country that he was in charge of.
Well, I think this has been the trend of most of our leaders, especially in Africa, in that they have destroyed their own countries. Look at Zimbabwe. The health delivery system there has been destroyed. If you go to the hospital today, you are lucky even to get treatment. But we have seen that our leaders, they have this rhetoric of talking about, like, for instance, Mugabe spoke so much about Africa Renaissance, spoke so much about Pan-Africanism, spoke so much about the continent doing its own things. But charity should begin at home. This is a man who presided over the running of the state for 37 years. But in those 37 years, what we've seen was a decay or a total collapse of not just the health delivery system, but the education system and the other social services in Zimbabwe. So for Mr. Mugabe to die in Singapore, it's quite sad that he did not trust even his own life with our health delivery system.
And it's that kind of thing that's going to make trying to unpack his legacy difficult, Tino?
Yes, of course. I mean, when you have been president for 37 years, I don't think it will cost you so much money to probably build a hospital in Zimbabwe or in Harare or in your rural home for that matter. And you say this is a hospital for ZANU-PF stalwarts, or this is a hospital for government people. We would not really mind, because at the end of the day, these politicians will be going to get treatment there. But he has failed. Right now, as we are speaking, the general VP Chiwenga is in China on state funds, where he's receiving treatment. Why do they have to continue going to receive treatment when they can just build hospitals? When you build a proper hospital, you hire proper people to come and treat you. These guys have never planned ahead of that. But they've built mansions. I think you'll know of the Blue Roof. Mr. Mugabe built a very, very big house in Borodale. He should have spent his time there, but unfortunately he spent his time in Singapore. And now the biggest thing, the biggest problem is that he's not going to come there, he's not going to come back there by bus. It's another chartered flight that is going to be paid for by the people of Zimbabwe. Why should we continue paying for people's treatment when they had 37 years to build proper hospitals where they could go in and out and get treated? That has got to stop. So this sends a message to the rest of Africa and the young people to say we should not rush to celebrate. I have seen that people already are saying that Mr. Mugabe was a hero. They forgot that Mr. Mugabe, during the liberation, the land reform program, he came out with 21 farms. I, for one, I don't have a farm. All these ZANU-PF luminaries have got several farms, 10, 15, 21, 30 farms on their own, and they call that the liberation legacy. And the biggest problem that we are facing as a generation here in South Africa and Africa and beyond is that we revere such leaders, not knowing what is truly happening in the countries that they come from. You will see him receiving applauses. But they don't know that the ordinary man in Zimbabwe has no farm. My father, for that matter, tried to go through the land reform program. He went to another farm called the Beer Farm. When he went there, he chose the nice place that he thought would befit him. But after some time, they came in, these luminaries. They took him out. So this issue of liberation and land reform legacy is only preached to those people that do not understand the real situation on the ground. So there is quite a lot that has been spoken about, which is quite untrue in the perfect sense of truth. It's only ZANU-PF beneficiaries that have got mines. It's only ZANU-PF beneficiaries that have got land. So to a very large extent, there has not been any land reform. If land reform must start, it should start now. And start taking that land that was claimed.
A lot of people will say and argue that Robert Mugabe was under fire and under attack from the West because he was bold enough to stand up against them, hence the sanctions and the vilification. What would you say to those people?
Well, I think one of his legacies that he has left us was the undermining of whiteness, in the sense that you look at what is happening in the rest of the continent, the West African bloc, where the French continue to come and plunder the resources of those countries. You look at South Africa, in that economic liberation is still a dream here in South Africa, but in Zimbabwe, never mind about the faults that Mugabe had during his his time in power, but you can't dispute that to a certain extent he championed the economic emancipation of the black people in Zimbabwe. You talk of the indigenization policy. Quite, yes, it had its own controversies, but certainly it was meant to benefit and to make sure that the black people of Zimbabwe have benefited. What was only bad was, how the cronies and he, Mugabe, that presided over, the corruption over the years, the plunder of the country's resources that did not benefit a majority of the people of Zimbabwe. So people will look at Mugabe in one side as the guy who championed, economic emancipation of the black people. On the other side, as a guy who presided over, corruption, over nepotism, over a plunder of resources of the state for selfish gains.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about his Pan-African legacy. And let's start by taking a look at this message that was posted by Yoweri Museveni, who's the president of Uganda. Again, himself, someone who was in power for a very long time, still president there. But let's take a look and see what President Yoweri Museveni says. I learned this morning about the passing of an African liberation icon and great Pan-Africanist, His Excellency Robert Mugabe. I join President Mnangagwa, the people of Zimbabwe, and the entire African continent in mourning the demise of this great son of Africa. May his soul rest in peace. Was he this great Pan-Africanist?
Look, there was a time when he was a real great Pan-Africanist. But as they say, you got to know to stop, when to stop when you are gambling. You can't continue gambling for the rest of your life. A good gambler knows when to stop. Mr. Mugabe did not realize that there was a time to stop. So while, yes, he forgot to stop, he then went on to plunder. But unfortunately, you see, the biggest problem we have here in Africa is these guys, these are leaders, they want to be diplomatic with the truth. They should be saying, look, we don't understand why you took so much time in power, why you took 37 years in power. You know, they should be cultivating a culture of change amongst us. But they are not doing that. So they are busy praising one another. The very same way that they praised him when he was alive is the same way that they are praising him now. But this rhetoric of Pan-Africanism, it has got to be tangible. I have not seen it anywhere where it is tangible. They like writing about it, they like making poems about it, but they don't really practice it. So at the end of the day, when there is no implementation, it remains a pipe dream. Yeah. So there is nothing much to celebrate about.
All right, so you belong to an NGO called Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, and there were a number of these kinds of bodies that came into being over the years in Zimbabwe. What does that tell us about the leadership of President Mugabe over time?
I think from independence, we noticed how Mugabe veered off, you know, the ideas of the liberation struggle, and it only took 3 years, if not from 1980, when he presided over the killings of the over 20,000 people in Matabeleland. That was a sign to tell you that this is an independence that has gone wrong. And from that, he presided over corruption, the Willow scandal in 1987. Of when he was taking instructions, from Bretton Woods institutions like IMF and World Bank, and did SAP in 1992. That also resulted in the privatization of quite a number of state institutions, and that rendered a lot of Zimbabweans unemployed, and the cost of living continued going high. The food riots in 1998, when the cost of living also became so high for a majority of Zimbabweans. And for us as an institution, as Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, it is not what started. What started was, the call for a new constitution, a new people-driven constitution. So the constitutional struggle that started in the 1997, which also, gave the resistance that we saw when that constitution was rejected in 2000, when Mugabe wanted to impose a constitution to the people of Zimbabwe. Then subsequently, organizations like the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition were formed in 2001, but it was also in response to the misgovernance, the undemocratic practices of Robert Mugabe, the selfishness, the greed, the corruption that Mugabe presided over, for the past 21 years then. And us as an institution, we have been all along, the reason why we said Crisis in the Zimbabwe Coalition was the realization that there was a crisis in governance in our country, there was a crisis in the economy of our country, and right now this name still remains, because even after the fall of Mugabe, in fact, what we have seen after Mugabe was removed in 2017, and also his death, is to say that it was not just the problem of Mugabe, but it was a culture, the Mugabeism culture, that Emmerson Mnangagwa and his team have continued with that path. So we can safely say that the death of Mugabe and his removal have exposed who was really behind the power of Mugabe, and that is the military, and that is Emmerson Mnangagwa and his gang.
All right, perhaps a final thought, Tino. What is the legacy that Robert Mugabe leaves behind?
Xenophobia that we are suffering here in South Africa. People from Zimbabwe are being treated like criminals for seeking to sell tomatoes so that they can fend for their families. Some are in Europe, they are still suffering there, But we should not, we shouldn't really despair. At the end of the day, we acknowledge the fact that he did fight in the liberation struggle. He tried to get us educated. But his legacy, as we sum it up, is this new fake dispensation that we have now. It's part of his legacy. He did retired in time, promoted democracy. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about the fake dispensation that is being presided over by Mr. Mnangagwa. That's part of his legacy.
Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. It's a sad time, I think, for reflection. A lot of mixed feelings, but certainly his place in history is assured. We saw both sides of him, I guess, over time. Thank you so much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more for you right here on SA Today. Stay with us.